Alright, episode 44 of Plan to Experience, and today it's gonna be me and you and Zaboomafoo. Because today we're talking about Coquerel's Sifaka. And that's how you're supposed to pronounce it, but I'm absolutely gonna call it the Sifaka many a times, solely because I'm reading it off of a piece of paper. But yes, technically speaking, it should be pronounced the Sifaka. Which actually leads us into our first little tidbit. I know, so quick to the introduction. It actually comes from the Malagasy onomatopoeia for the sound that the animal makes. Not just the one in question today, the Coquerel, but also the other species of Sifaka, which all make this noise of a somewhat hissing sound, which is the air entering their mouth, sort of like how we would go before speaking. They make somewhat of a shh, and their alarm is faha, faha, or sounds something akin to that. Now, the animal in question, despite not having the term lemur in its name, it is in fact a species of lemur. But they're close to not being a lemur anymore. One of the main notable reasons for their separation has to do with their form of locomotion, their famous bounding and leaping. Now, the two main species of Sifaka, the one we have in the game, are the Coquerels, and then the other that we didn't get, which looks pretty similar, so we're not missing out too much, Vero Sifaka, which I think I'm pronouncing right. It is French, so, you know, I can only assume. They both do this bounding, however, the Vero seems to do it more on a side-by-side, crossing its legs, sort of like if you were to bound to your left or your right. While it can go forward, it tends to do it sideways, while the Coquerels does it straight on most of the time. Now, like I said, it is still a species of lemur, so pretty much if you've seen my ruffed lemur video, where we discuss both the black and white and the red ruffed lemur, you may remember a few little details that I'm going to go back over, but don't worry, I will do my best to keep it fresh because I've become, hopefully, funnier than I was at the time. Now, on top of everything, let me discuss the exhibit in question. Now, Madagascar, especially the locations that the Sifaka reside in, are very unique. So right now I am building a viewing area that is akin to a very rustic building that you may be able to find on the coast of Madagascar. And it's also going to play some part in its climbing enrichment, and I'll describe that when we get there. However, for the time being, we're just going to pretty much gloss over the building itself. It's nothing special because I'm not good at creating structures. And the more important part is actually the environment we're going to be making. See, while it is correct to state that the Sifaka is native to a tropical climate, there's a little bit of an issue with the way Planet Zoo deals with foliage. Let me explain. Now, the most famous environments that are known in Madagascar are twofold. One is their massive, it's hard to even call them fjords, because they are extremely jagged, and I will be putting a picture up now, and I will be trying to add that to the exhibit. But the other one are the massive baobab forests. I can't really call it forest, it's more of a grassland, but that's where the confusion comes in. Despite being a very important part of the environment that you can find the Sifaka, they're not technically compatible due to the lack of this tree being in the tropical category in the game. However, there is a bit of a leeway with it. Unfortunately, if you do want to add the baobab tree,
you're not going to have 100% environmental enrichment, but hey, let's just let that go and enjoy what we have here. Now, on top of all that, they are technically in a tropical environment, but the forests that the Coquerel Sifaka resides in solely in dry, deciduous forests. So it doesn't quite have a ton of palm trees or other non-pine evergreens, but it's also not very wet, so it's still very dry. It's a very unique and interesting type of environment, which I'm going to do my best to recreate here, but unfortunately, like I said, many of the plant life that you would have there are in the grassland expanse, and they don't have that part of the Sifaka's tag. So, we're going to do what we can. Now, after all that, let's discuss the animal's name. You usually start with that, but I got a little excited. So, first and foremost, the scientific name is the Protithecus conquereli, Conquereli, obviously, and Propethecus, which I could not find a translation for, solely because I don't speak whatever language this is, and I can't figure out where it comes from. However, Pithecus is very common in scientific names for monkeys and other primates. If you're familiar with extinct species, you may know things like Gigantopithecus, which was the world's largest great ape, or the Mesopithecus, which is a very old monkey species. So we can at least infer that much. Now, Coquerel actually comes from yet another Frenchman. Great, lovely. I sure do love the French. Anyway, it is named after French entomologist Charles Coquerel, who worked in Madagascar and the surrounding islands. Now, why was a lemur named after an entomologist? I don't know. Because even though many lemurs are insectivorous, for the most part, Sifaka are pretty much mostly, if not completely, herbivorous to an extent, obviously. So, I don't know, other than the fact that he worked in Madagascar and probably inspired whoever found this animal. That's my best guess, and we're going to stick with it. Now, it is interesting that I'm making such a large exhibit, in all honesty, because they don't live in a very large area. Usually, they only live in an area as small as 4.8 acres up to what we see maxing out at 19.8 acres. Now, territories do overlap, seeing how it's an island, there's limited space, and usually they are okay. When it comes to friendly engagements, they actually will rub their noses together, which is adorable. And I had to add because, again, adorable always makes the cut. They are matriarchal, just like most lemurs are, essentially meaning that women rule this world. Hell yeah, girl power, let's go. But for the most part, they aren't too different to lemurs when it comes to their social structure. However, it's very interesting. A few things are very interesting about the Sifaka, and that is the fact that they have a very strange morning ritual. So every morning, while the sun rises, the Coquerel Sifaka will sit down, spread their arms, and pull a solitaire, praising the sun in an attempt to warm themselves up for the day. And I say praising the sun not only as a joke and a reference, because hell yeah, Dark Souls, but also in a lot of traditional Malagasy cultures, they were seen as sun worshippers because of this practice. And I get it. If I can find a picture, throwing it up there. Thank you, Prim. So, not only are they interesting in the very basic sense of their existence, but how many other animals do you know praise the glory of Helios? Not many. I know that much. But adding to their cultural influence, for the longest time, it was actually very taboo in Malagasy culture to hunt things like lemurs and obviously Sifaka. And one of the reasons for that is because of an old ancient story that goes something like this. Long ago, a young child was attempting to gather honey from a beehive. While he was attempting to reach said beehive in a high up tree branch, as he got closer and closer and closer, eventually he slipped due to the bees attempting to defend their hive. And he fell a great distance, far enough that it definitely would have killed him if it wasn't for the fact that a large lemur had grabbed the boy, saving his life and returning him home. And from that day forward, lemurs were a sacred animal, not to be hunted. Now, while that is an absolutely lovely and touching story, its influence has unfortunately not stuck around with modern cultures. There are still plenty of groups that are completely against the killing and consuming of lemur meat. However, due to cultural erosion and immigration, it is now a very real issue that the Sifaka have to deal with, which sucks because they've got enough goddamn problems. They're critically endangered, and the main reason for such is due to deforestation, destruction of territory, most of which is done so that the local peoples can pretty much do slash burning in an attempt to open up land for cattle and other grazing animals, along with yearly burns pretty much in an attempt to kind of control the plants and other non-animal wildlife. And on top of that, they have their own predators other than people. For example, the infamous fossa, which, yeah, it's not actually pronounced fusa, it's fossa, which sad childhood noises. But along with them, they also have a lot of large birds that will attempt to hunt them down, and they've got enough issues to deal with other than us being, menaces to their society. But I digress. Before we get too much further, it appears I have gotten to the point where I am going to show off how we're going to make this exhibit interactive and interesting. Now, while I did originally want to create essentially the area from Zaboomafoo, I am not nearly talented enough to do something like that. So instead, I opted to pretty much make an opening in the roof so that the Sifaka can walk across the I-beams that I'm going to add. Now, if you're wondering, are there interactive exhibits that you can make with lemurs and Sifaka? I don't know, I didn't check. I have a list, but I just figured this would be fun, so we ball, let's go. But it is important to note that you do want to keep in mind the possibility of the animal escaping. So make sure you cut off the top, which I'm going to do with stone because I figured that was the best way to do so. And make sure that the entrance is one way so that, they can't just bolt at the first sign of an opening. Now, as I finish up adding these I-beams and really just making sure that the rest of the exhibit looks nice, let's discuss everyone's favorite PBS kids show that has to do with animals.
It's the Coquerel!
What most people know the Sifaka from has to be Zaboomafoo. For those of you who don't know, it was a series filmed and released January 25th, 1999 until November 21st, 2001. And, of course, was replayed over and over on TV because it was one of the best animal-based shows, not only for kids, but as PBS had at the time. And I know it definitely influenced me when I was growing up. I can't remember just how many times I probably annoyed my mom bounding through the house, but, hey-ho, kids gonna be kids. But interestingly enough, the main character, I'm sure as you could tell, the namesake animal being the Coquerel's Sifaka. Now, the actual acting animal was known as Jovian, who was a resident of the Duke Lemur Center, where the show was actually filmed. That set was in Education Center. So, while Zabumafu was the main character and the, one everyone remembers since he is the named character, it also had two other protagonists, the Kratt brothers, being Chris and Martin Kratt, who were a biologist and zoologist, respectively, and helped actually educate all of us kids on the animals that were presented in the shows. Now, it is also important to note that, unfortunately, if you were not aware, Jovian had passed away. Unfortunately, he passed November 10th, 2014 due to kidney failure, but do not worry. He was preceded by his son, Charlemagne, or Charlie, and I'm also happy to note that he has had a daughter within the years. So, hooray. Life goes on, and we all find a way. Now, if you are curious, the Kratt brothers actually do still have series on PBS Kids all about nature. So, if you yourself have kids and remember the days of watching Zabumafu, while that series no longer exists, the two brothers that have helped you learn as a child can help your kids if, you have access to PBS Kids. I said kids a lot. Ugh. Anyway, now let's step away because I am out of information about the animal. And we're going to discuss what is happening here in the exhibit. So, as you can see, I have added plenty of climbing area, more than I needed, along with plenty of enrichment items. And I feel like I don't quite discuss the creation of an exhibit enough in my episodes. And seeing how I do feel like this is going to be a relatively popular episode, however, I have eaten my words more times than I could count in this series. I do feel like a lot of people are going to want to watch this and see this due to how recent this animal was added to the game. So, there's an important note to make, because I see this question a lot, never on my episodes, obviously, because I'm not nearly as good as some people. But, people want to know how to get inspired in making an aesthetically interesting exhibit. First and foremost, there's two main ways you can go about it. You can go my route, where I am very inspired by actual locations in the world. I've discussed many times where I have found pictures of national parks. The ones that come to mind, other than this one, I also took inspiration for the ostrich, the black rhino, the American alligator, and so on. So that's one way to do it. You get the idea of where these animals naturally live. And then the other one is go to your local zoo, or if you're like me and your local zoo is kind of, let's say, bare bones, find pictures of some of the bigger zoos. Zoos in Philly, San Diego, wherever the big, main zoo is. Take a look at what they do with their exhibits. Because, in all reality, they're like a theme park. No matter how interesting the animals, they have to keep it engaging. And to be completely fair and honest, that's the best way to make a good exhibit. Think about how you would want to look at it and make sure you know where you're actually being able to see from. Now, I forgot to add the secondary viewing location I was planning to have in this exhibit, and that was actually going to be one of the bubbles, or a couple bubbles set throughout the area. But that is a good way to get an idea of how to make things look more interesting and more capturing to an audience. On top of all that, something else you need to understand is the locomotion of the animal. How does it like to move what makes it seem fluid and smooth. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's just practice. Practice, practice, practice. If you go back and see some of my early works, they look like trash. Especially the American Buffalo, which if I ever go back and redo these, that is the first one I'm doing. That was so bad. But anyway, before I go too long on a tangent, those are my 3 main tips. Real life zoos, real life natural environments, and finally, just figure out how these animals like to live their lives. With that all said and done, I have only one last thing, and that is a request that you come see me on my live stream Christmas Eve into Christmas Day. It's going to be 6 p.m. American Eastern Standard Time on December 31st for 12 hours going into January 1st, 6 a.m. I hopefully will be able to raise some money if you would be so kind as to donate. I'm going to be raising money, not for myself, don't worry. It's going to be for my local zoo and game preserve that had been the biggest inspiration to me to become this animal-loving whack job on the internet. So, I do hope to see you there. If not, that's fine. Until the next episode, we'll talk about the cougar. Just remember to go outside, touch grass, drink water, hug your loved ones, and bye-bye.